Hey folks, this is a quick video to talk about a subject that's been near and dear to my heart for about as long as I've been shooting, but it's finally come to a head, and I think I've gained some understanding about the problem. And the problem is trigger slap, or would you call it trigger bite, or would you call it trigger sting? Well, there's lots of names for it. A lot of people have different opinions on it, but it has been something that's affected me for as long as I've been shooting, which is about 50 years now. And I've been trying to figure out exactly what causes it. To me, it feels a lot like a bite, and it happens on my trigger finger right here, where I'm pinching between my index finger and my thumb, but I get a really sore area there every time I fire certain guns. Probably doesn't occur in anything less than a 9mm, but it can be on a maybe a 32 or a 327 Smith & Wesson, something like that. Anyways, pinching right here, really sharp, really irritating, and it makes me not want to shoot more than about 20 or 30 rounds at a time. So I've heard about it on the web. Other people have complained about it, but I wonder exactly what is it, what causes it. Not so much what it is. I know what it is. It's a stinging of my trigger finger, but why? And why is it that there's a lot of people? I mean, quite a few. You read about it online and all sorts of conjecture about why it happens. But I've really tried to figure it out lately. And for me, the guns that have produced the biggest problem are the SIG P320s, which I dearly love. I love those guns, and I have a number of them here. And I'm going to give you an example right now. This is one I recently bought. It's a compact. We got 4 lugs here, so it's the 4-inch barrel, basically 3.9-inch. This gun is unloaded. There's no magazine. There's nothing in the chamber. Every time I shoot this thing, it stings me. Now here's my grip. You know, I take what is the current favorite grip, I believe, where I wrap my hands around. I get good purchase on the side of the left side. Thumbs forward. I put my thumb about as far forward as my straightened trigger finger. I don't have it too far that way or that way. It seems to come to a good rest in there. And when I pull the gun out and fire, I get bit. No matter how firmly I'm holding that pistol, and no matter what 9mm load I'm using. Now, one of the things that I've thought in the past was, if you look, you can see how my finger, and this is where it gets pinched right here, is coming between, getting possibly caught between the top of the trigger guard and the bottom of the trigger. And if you look at some of these later so-called straight triggers by SIG, you'll see that they've got a fairly sharp point right here. And when the gun recoils, it bites me right in there where you can see my finger getting pinched. Why do they design stupid guns like this? Well, maybe it's not the gun that's stupid. Now, what I mean by that is, if you take a look at my finger, the left hand is a little more pronounced, you will see that as I bend my finger, it's torqued quite a bit this way. And what does that do? Well, instead of having a straighter position like that would be, and I can't hardly straighten that out. It actually hurts a little to straighten that out. But that puts it in a position to drag between the top of the trigger guard and the bottom of the trigger. And that's what happens. And you can actually see, if you look at this angle, where it's actually torqued a little bit in this plane here as I bend it. And the more I bend it, the more it torques, which just drives it underneath the trigger end, and between that and the top of the trigger guard even more. So anything that's going to cause that gun to recoil is going to jam up there and pinch that finger. Now, I looked up on the web, and that's the background that you're seeing here, and there's a term on Wikipedia. It's called clinodactyly. I believe that's Clinodactyly. Clinodactyly, I believe it's pronounced. And it's a bending of the joints in the finger unnaturally. Now it's a I don't know, it's a genetic problem, but it's something that happens at birth, and there's not a lot you can do about it. And people don't talk about it too much because there's no real angle that your fingers are supposed to be at. Mine just happened to have more curving in the trigger finger, the index finger, than probably most humans have, and it happens right and left. So I say it's a little more pronounced on this, especially the torquing, but it's the same thing on this finger on my right hand. So I tried to think about, how I could reduce that. And one of the things is we'll get a heavier gun. Less recoil action. It'll sting less. Not so. Well, let me get this one first for you. This is the big honkin' SIG P320X5 with the heavy tungsten infused frame. Now, there's a fair amount of clearance, though this is also unloaded, by the way. There's a fair amount of clearance between the bottom of the trigger and the top of the guard here, but as it comes back, that clearance is reduced, and I can still get my finger in there. And you can see where it's polished right here and here. I tried to round those edges off to reduce the amount of pinch that I was going to get, but it still stings me. Now, all right, some of you are going to say, well, just roll your finger around so that you're either contacting it with your tip of your trigger finger or you're trying to straighten it more, but I can't change the angle because of the way the frame of the gun is squared off right here. If I grip the gun properly, it places my finger against that, and I'm limited to how I can move things around. So I'm really basically doomed to this this problem of trigger bite, and the weight of the gun really means nothing. Now, one thing I thought about is the lightness of the triggers. This is a hollow back trigger. As you can see, it's basically just sheet metal that's bent around. And I believe they went with a very lightweight trigger to get around that problem they had with the gun going off when it was dropped on a surface like this. And then the momentum of the trigger would cause the gun to fire. So one of the things they did, besides the safeties in the slide, of course, is to make the trigger as light as possible. And with a light trigger, you're going to get more vibration. And if you want to call this stinging effect a vibratory effect, then having a very lightweight, stiff trigger is going to make that all the worse. So having a heavier gun in place of the lighter weight gun, this one happens to have a Wilson Combat handle on it. It doesn't really matter any difference in the weight, because the weight of this thing and the stiffness of this frame is considerable. But the sting that I get from both triggers is the same. And I then bought the custom job, SIG Custom Works, AXG, I think they call it. Thinking perhaps with the aluminum frame, this gun, which is also empty, would not have the problem, but of course it does. So coming to the realization that I can't do anything to fix it because my fingers are bent the way my fingers are bent, can't do anything about that, I put on a pair of gloves. How intelligent is that? And even with the thinnest gloves I own, the problem went away. I did not get stung when pulling the trigger on any of these guns if I was wearing those so-called shooting gloves. Now, the shooting gloves are very, very thin. Most of the ones that come now with the material that they're using is a lot thinner, and you get finger dexterity feel with them, so they're good for shooting. So then I thought to myself, well, if that little bit protects me, and I don't get the sting, then what can I do about it? Now, Hickok 45 has been known for putting Band-Aids on his trigger fingers because he is also bothered by the problem. He's talked about it in a number of his reviews, so he just wraps a Band-Aid on his finger. But I don't really like that. But it does kind of agree with what I get, the relief I get by just putting a very thin pair of gloves on. So I came up with the idea of gluing on something onto the face of the trigger that would pad the whole face of the trigger for me. I started looking around the house for what I might use and came up with shelf lining. Now, shelf lining is a material that prevents skidding, and it also cushions like Chinaware or something when you put it in a shelf. And it's very long wearing and it's very cheap. So with this gun, after proving to myself that I would also get trigger sting, I glued on, and I'll put a little light on this, I glued on some of the shelf lining on the front using super glue, but I used the flexible super glue. That cured the whole problem. I don't need gloves anymore, just with this little bit of padding, and you can see how thin or thick, however you want to refer to it, it solves the problem. So that's what I'm suggesting. If you have this problem, I don't know what percentage of people have it, but if you do, put that pad on so it's long enough so that it gets pinched instead of your fingers. And this lower part of the trigger is cushiony. I mean, it isn't much, but it's kind of like the gloves were. It's kind of the same idea. Anyway, give it a try. Give me some comments below. See what you think.